I haven't set up one of these in a while. Not
One of
since
what?
a live stream thing.
Oh, okay.
Not since my before my Georgia debate.
Georgia debate?
Yeah, I had a live debate in Georgia
Oh,
on the 5th.
okay. How'd that go? Who'd you debate?
Samuel Nissan on does evil
Oh,
disprove the Christian God?
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. He's from like Explain Apologetics, right?
Yep, he founded it, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, probably one of my favorite types of debates are devil's advocate debates, I think what it's called, where yeah, you and him did a swap. So you were the Christian or theist, and he was the atheist. Those are so much fun.
Yep, yep, those are really entertaining.
So yeah, no, I think it's nice when well, I don't know if it's nice, depends on the person, but like you really have to feel confident in your opponent's arguments and you have to kind of like get inside of their head and all that stuff. And I often wondered how I would do in that type of situation. So
Yeah, that's definitely true. That you have to really know the both ins and outs of both your side and your opponent's side. That
yeah.
art of war quote: "Know your enemy and know yourself. You'll never lose in 1,000 battles," kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, actually, I don't know if you know the channel Jubilee YouTube channel.
I've heard of it. Sounds
They do
familiar.
they do like a bunch of like videos where they have people like talking opposing views, all that stuff, and they've been doing this one thing where you have like the one atheist pretending to be a Christian among like five other Christians, and they have to like talk to each other and vote out the person that they think is the atheist, and they win money at the end. And they do vice versa, like a Christian pretending to be an atheist, and it's pretty entertaining.
That is a great idea. I'm gonna steal
Yeah.
that and get Tart to do that sometime.
Who?
The Atheist Roundtable on another one of
Oh,
the groups I partner with.
oh yeah, do it, man. That'd be awesome. I mean, especially it'd be like thoughtful atheists versus like those guys they just found on the street or whatever. So,
Yes, Trillion. This is live. How you know? Because I'm answering the question live.
how's it going, guys?
All right, so Cornell, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, so my name's Kornel. Uh, I'm a Christian and I'm into apologetics and, you know, debates, about apologetics and atheism and God and Christianity and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Cool. So last time we talked about some of the general arguments, cosmological and moral, I think. And this
Mm.
time we want to talk about the teleological. Would you mind telling me what your position is on the teleological argument and why you think it's evidence of a God?
Yeah, so I, I like to call it the fine tuning argument. But basically, I I'm leaning on a lot of Dr. Robin Collins' work, and uh, I I kind of took his syllogism for the argument, and basically goes like this: the existence of fine tuning is not improbable under theism. Um, Premise two: the existence of fine tuning is very improbable under naturalism. And the conclusion from premise one and two, it follows that the fine tuning data provides strong evidence in favor of design over not design.
Okay, yeah, that's easy to understand argument. So why do you think that it's fine tuning is more likely under theism than naturalism is essentially the argument. So if how would you conclude that of the infinitely many types of gods, there is a very small number that would create a life permitting universe? And of the infinitely many types of universes, there's a very small many that are going to produce a life permitting universe. It seems like they're the same probability. Why do you think that the theistic one is more likely than the naturalistic one? Why would a life permitting universe be more likely under theism than naturalism?
Okay, so I'm not sure I followed the your first point there.
All right, let me restate it. So a god who would design a life permitting universe is one kind of god. There's also lots of other kinds of potential gods. A god who would design nothing but black holes permitting universe, a universe with nothing but pink unicorns, a universe with squares and nothing but squares, just a box of gold and that's it. There's infinitely many types of universes that could exist, and infinitely many types of gods that could create each of those types of universes depending on what their nature is. So this god prefers a universe with just black holes and no life. This universe prefers a god of just hydrogen particles. Um, and so there's infinitely many types of gods, just as many as there are types of universes, and there is a one-to-one correlation of this god would prefer this universe for each possible universe. So it seems like the probability of a god creating a life-permitting universe is exactly the same as a life-permitting universe in a naturalistic hypothesis, because each of the various types of possible universes has a corresponding type of possible god who would want to create that universe. So why would you conclude that under theism it's more likely that the universe is fine-tuned than under naturalism? Because just like there is, it seems to be a one-to-one correlation, and just like you could say that, well,
Yeah.
any kind of god could be deterred. Actually, I'll let you continue on first before I
Yeah,
respond
yeah,
to that.
yeah. Okay, I think I know what you're saying. So you're basically kind of equating the idea of um, the multiple ways that the fundamental constants and quantities, or the initial conditions of the universe, it could have been like a billion different ways. There's like different combination of percentages and constants it could have been. You're saying it's the same for a god that has certain qualities or like
Attributes,
certain
whatever you want to call them,
attributes.
sure.
Oh, okay, yeah. I don't know if they're analogous. I don't know if initial conditions are analogous to attributes of God. Why do you think that they're, if you don't mind me asking, why do you think that they're analogous?
Um, so there's a necessary thing, and that necessary thing has some kind of attributes, and those attributes can be different. That's essentially the argument, and you just change the necessary thing being a god who has attributes of whatever attributes you want to attribute to a god, and then I could just
Hmm.
say the universe has attributes like the fine tuning constants, which I would say could all be determined by one underlying quantum force, like the nature of the necessary universe. And so they're you both in both models you have a necessary thing with attributes, and if you want to argue that the universe has these attributes which could be arbitrarily changed in any way, I can do the same thing about the god and say this god has these attributes that can be arbitrarily changed in any way. And then normally the response is, well, no, God can't be arbitrarily changed in any way because his nature has some kind of determining factor to it that ties everything together. And I could just say the same thing about the universe. Now, the universe has some determining factor to it, which makes it designed exactly as it is. Like all of the constants are physically tied together, and if you change one, you change all of them proportionally. And so the way that the constants are now is necessary, just like you think God is necessary. So it seems like if you want to argue that there's an infinite or a large amount of possible combinations of fine tuning, most of which don't have life, and only a very few of which have life. I could just do the same thing to a god and say there are many different combinations of possible gods, most of which don't design life, very few of which do. And so the argument hinges on this idea that you can take the properties of the universe and change them in any way you want. And I could just make the same argument about a god, and it doesn't seem to be any more likely that there are a necessary set of qualities of a god that cannot be changed than there are a
Yeah,
necessary set of qualities of the universe that cannot be changed. It just seems like we're both asserting that that's the case for our preferred hypothesis. And so, which leads back to in your argument, it seems like you're just asserting it's the case that it's more likely.
hmm.
There doesn't seem to be any evidence to support that. It just seems to be like you think, oh, the universe could be many ways. God can only be this way because I believe God can only be
Yeah,
this way. And that
yeah.
doesn't really seem to count as evidence.
I see what you're saying. I guess I'm just kind of like fascinated because like I've never heard anyone bring up this kind of response. So, and I guess like one thing that kind of comes up to me is like I see the connection you want to make and how you're saying how it's it's analogous, but I fail to see how like a property of God, like let's say his goodness, is similar to, for example, the initial explosion of the Big Bang, and like how it had, uh, if it was like different in strength, as little as 1 part in 10 to the 60th, the universe would have either quickly collapsed back on itself or expanded too rapidly for stars to form. In either case, life would be like impossible, expand too rapidly and all that stuff. and then if it was too slow, then it wouldn't happen at all. Um, and so like I don't see how that initial condition, for example, is similar to a property of God, and how would it be the same? That's what I'm struggling with.
So in one, God has a nature where he desires living things, and the other, God has a nature where he desires that the universe expands faster than life could form. So if you
So
just take God's desire or will or his nature or whatever property you think causes him to create a life permitting universe, like that's probably where you should ask why was it more likely that God would create a life permitting universe in your model?
okay, okay. I think that's a better question. I still kind of struggling with how it's a one-to-one
Yeah,
comparison.
yeah. I'm gonna. I'm. It's usually a. I'm gonna take your same model and apply it to the
Yeah, I know.
multiverse. So
I know. Yeah. So then I guess like premise one, um, I'd say that the argument in support of it can be simply like God is an all good being, and it's good for uh, him to make to fine tune the universe because it brings about intelligent, conscious beings, or it can it allows them to exist. So like you and me. And it's not surprising or improbable that God would create a world that could support intelligent life. And so fine tuning is not improbable under theism. And
so
so
essentially, he wants it. He wants life for some reason, and so he
right.
creates life for some reason. So I could just say he wants something else. So instead of what you define as perfect morality, which you would have to demonstrate exists and it corresponds to your definition, um, and that this God has all of these properties, has this property. I could just
Mhm.
say there's another kind of a God who has a property of all perfectness, and his all perfectness is a universe with just black holes and nothing else. That's what he defines as all
Mhm.
perfectness. And so your asserted kind of a God is no more likely than this other asserted kind of a God because you haven't demonstrated that these properties correspond to reality. You
Well,
just said God
well,
has this property of
yeah.
goodness, and he because he wants he has this property, it necessarily leads to intelligent beings, which you've shown no connection there. Like I could say there is a property of Pixie Pops, and the property of Pixie Pops
Mm.
wants humans or whatever. It's just an
Right.
arbitrary thing we've asserted. So there's because there's no evidence that this property exists and it is the way you say it is. It's just an asserted property, and that your
Hmm.
God has this property. All of those things are arbitrary, and you could just say the same thing about any potential hypothetical God, and it's equally as supported. So the God who would create just black holes is equally as likely as the God who would be perfectly your God who would be perfectly good and create intelligent beings, and there's no reason to prefer one over the other.
Yeah.
Therefore, the likelihood is exactly the same under the God hypothesis of creating this particular kind of a universe with life as it is for creating all black holes, just like the case is with the naturalistic hypothesis of there's no reason to prefer black holes versus life.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, one thing that I kind of like you're talking about like to demonstrate whether he would prefer to create like a universe like this. Like it seems to me like well we know of like a bunch of different ways that the universe could have been. It isn't. It's actually life permitting. And so obviously the universe isn't just full of black holes. We have some black holes, but we don't have too many to where it's not life permitting.
Right,
So
but
wouldn't that be
yeah,
some
that's
kind of
the
demonstration that at least we have the God that wouldn't want um, just black holes?
no. So that's the anthropic principle. Yes, obviously, with the whatever the initial conditions were of the Big Bang must necessarily have been life producing because we exist. That's true. But what we're looking at here isn't uh, whether or not the initial conditions are life permitting, because obviously they were. We're trying to compare what was more likely, a
Mhm.
god who created it or a natural hypothesis who created it. So your argument is that a god is more likely because there's only one kind of a god or only a very few kinds of a god, and they would all create a life permitting universe, and so the probability of a life permitting universe under God is higher than the probability of a life permitting universe under a natural hypothesis, because you're saying, well, there's all of these other ways the universe could have been that could not have been life permitting. Like obviously those aren't the ways they are, like clearly. So is that evidence that the natural hypothesis must necessarily be life permitting? Like did the universe have to be life permitting? Therefore, your argument wouldn't make any sense, right? Because
Yeah.
if the universe has to be life permitting, and that it would be, could I count that as evidence of that the universe is a naturally life permitting necessarily?
Okay, I think I see what you're saying. So I'm not saying it has to be life permitting. I'm not. In fact, I think that um, you know, God is the best explanation to why it is life permitting. I'm not saying that it must be life permitting.
Right, right, exactly.
And in
So,
fact,
so
and
the point being there is that we're not arguing that God um, would necessarily create or would not necessarily create life. The point here is just to compare how many possible universes have life, how many possible universes don't have life, how many possible gods would create life, how many possible gods would not create life. And you're trying to say that it's more likely that the God thing, the God category would produce a life from a universe. And
yeah,
I'm arguing that it's not. I'm saying that
right.
the number of gods who would produce life is exactly the same as the number of universes that would produce life. And the number of gods who would not produce life is the exact same as the number of universes who would not produce life. So there's no difference statistically between the probability there.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. Yeah, I guess so. A few thoughts in my mind. Like I said, I've never heard this before, so I'm trying to interact with this. Like you're keeping me on my
Spontaneously?
toes spontaneously. Yeah. So I guess to me, like I'm willing to grant for the sake of argument. Okay, well, we don't know yet what kind of God this could be, and I don't know if I'll grant that God could be a million different ways or whatever. Like, um, but
Well,
when
actually,
we
let's pick up on that. So
okay,
if you want to say that God can't be a million different ways, that there's some
yeah,
limiting factor that God can only be a certain set number of ways because of there's this some property he has. I could just say the same thing about the universe. So instead of saying there's this small amount of universes that can produce life and this
mhm,
big amount that can't produce life, well, I can say there's this property in the universe we haven't discovered yet. And this
right,
property ties all of the physical forces together. It's just one force
hmm
that makes them all intertwined, kind of like the weak electromagnetic force. They're the same force. So if you change one, it affects both necessarily. I could say all the forces are tied together. And so if you change any force, they're all going to be changed proportionally. And so a life permitting universe is actually the most likely outcome in the naturalistic hypothesis. So it seems like both of us can take the hypothesis that we have a god or a naturalistic universe, then put in this undiscovered property and say, well, there's this property that makes our hypothesis determined or more likely to produce a life permitting universe. And neither of us have discovered, there's no evidence of either of our properties here. And so they're both equally supported. So either of us can say, um, there's a million different ways that God could be. There's is actually significantly larger than a million, but trillions and trillions and trillions of different ways a God could be, in trillions and trillions and trillions of different ways the universe could be. Or we could both insert our own preferred property that causes them to be determined, and there's only a few ways the universe could be, and only a few ways that God could be. And there doesn't seem to be any more evidence to support one of those over the other.
yeah, yeah. So I guess I'm trying to stay within the fine tuning argument, but like there are arguments that can show like the moral argument or like the ontological argument
Oh,
that God
right,
is
right. This is
all good.
there's
So
lots of other arguments we could bring in. That's usually the strategy is we bring up lots of different arguments, but just looking at the fine tuning argument on its
right,
own without considering any other ones, it doesn't count as any evidence at all for this reason that I'm
r-
presenting.
right, right. So I mean, when I think about like uh about like specific things, like I think um let's say we don't. I'm still having trouble with like equating um God's properties to like the multiple ways the initial conditions could have been.
Well, again, so
But I get why. Yeah.
it's not about the initial condition. So I'm saying that the initial conditions are determined by some other property that we haven't discovered yet.
Right.
So there's a
Yeah.
law underneath the initial conditions which determine all the initial conditions. And
A
that
law
one,
underneath the initial
and that's the
conditions.
one that's supposed to be analogous to God's property of goodness.
Okay. So this, but this isn't like because I'm still trying to compare the two and because I feel like something just doesn't fit with comparing the God's properties to that. So I guess I was just trying to initially to say like we could be more. I could grant to you like uh maybe we don't know that much about God, but we know like something like for example like he's powerful given what we observe in the universe. So like he's powerful, he's good, and then he's creative, right? Okay, so like uh in terms of like when I look at those properties, are they the same as well, is it the same as the 1 in 10 to the 60th power of the of the universe as when it expands, right? Like I feel like, or am I totally missing what you're saying? Like,
I don't think. Oh, maybe. So you're saying God has this property. He's creative,
mhm,
and this property of creativity. What it means is like we're looking at the universe and we're seeing there's this. There's lots
mhm.
of uniqueness to the universe. Therefore, God is creative, or something like that. And I could just do the same thing and say, look at all of this very particular way the universe is. I could say, therefore, the quantum law that we haven't discovered yet is very particular. It's very specific in what it
Right, but
is.
why would we favor? Well, why would we not favor? Because you're not really saying it's favor. You're saying it's just as ad hoc or something, right?
Yeah.
What why would you say it's as like just as ad hoc or no different?
Well, it's anthropic. So we're looking at the properties of the universe and we're saying that because of the way the universe we see is, the thing that must have created it has to be like this.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm really going based off the anthropic principle. Like to me, when I think about the anthropic principle, it's kind of like trivial to kind of look and be like, well, since it is the way it is, then this is what I think the question is um like why is it here, and um what's the likelihood that they are like the initial conditions and the way the universe is, what's the likelihood of that being? And so
Yeah, that's what I mean by the anthropic principle. So the question here is, why do you think God has this property of creativity? Because of, well, you look at the universe and you say, well, this seems to be very creative. And so you look at the universe, say, this seems to be creative, therefore God must be creative, something like that, right? That's how you come to the conclusion God is creative.
yeah, I think I'm just going to stick to the to my initial argument because I feel like we're kind of getting it. Maybe we hit like a dead end and we're kind of hit like just getting deeper into it. But
Well, the point here is that you assert God to have this property, and I can just assert the naturalistic hypothesis to have a new property. Neither of these properties we have evidence for. So you would have to, like, why would we conclude that your God is creative, therefore this universe is more likely? Is a more plausible explanation than the universe has this quantum particle, quantum law that we haven't discovered yet, and that makes a life printing universe more likely, because those
okay,
both seem to be equally unsupported assertions that we can both make.
right. So tell me again the quantum what?
Like so in a naturalistic hypothesis, there could be a quantum particle, a quantum entanglement
Quantum.
between the laws, an undiscovered law, just any natural thing that determines all of the forces, makes them all interconnected.
Okay, so then I guess some things that I think that we would prefer, and they wouldn't be equal, or it's not just as uh, gosh, ad hoc. I'd say that like the one that you're positing, the undiscovered law, it seems it depends on what you mean by law when you say that. So like would you agree that the laws of nature are descriptions, or are they something else? Like the descriptions about how the universe works?
Yeah, the descriptions of a property of the universe.
So then like this undiscovered law would also be a description of the property of the universe?
Yeah, it'd be the nature of the fundamental reality. So just like the attributes of God are a description of God, this law of
Right.
nature is a description of the fundamental nature of nature.
Right. So like I guess I would favor God over I'd say one reason to favor God over your parody would be that um, like a description is not causal.
Well, I mean, obviously, the description of the law is just describing a thing. So, like saying God has the property of what creativity, like that's a description of
You're talking
God.
about.
So
So
the
you're talking about like this undiscovered law. There's something behind it that's
Yeah. So God has a nature. He's creative, and
okay.
then the nature has a nature. It's like a quantum particle, quantum field, something.
Hmm.
And then we give a description to that by calling it a law. So just like saying God is creative is descriptive of God, there is an undiscovered law is descriptive of nature. So there's just a fundamental nature, fundamental God. They both have properties or attributes or whatever you want to call them, and they could both have an attribute that makes a life permitting universe very likely or very
Okay.
unlikely.
So then what would be one to one to God then if you're attributing creativeness or goodness, for example, to the undiscovered law, then what is the under what is this undiscovered law? What what is it? What do you what
It
attribute
it
of what is it? Like what is the thing?
it causes all of the fundamental forces to be interconnected. So if you change one, they all change proportionally.
Okay. Uh Maybe I can ask another way. What like if goodness is a property of God, this undiscovered law is a property of what?
Nature. So naturalistic
Nature. Okay.
pantheism, if you want a more
Okay.
technical term.
Nature. So like from the theistic point of view, God created nature. So
Sure.
would you say that this nature created nature?
It's eternal and always existing or outside of space-time, whichever way you want to put it. It is the necessary thing. So there
So
is a necessary thing in nature, which is analogous to a necessary God. So I usually call it naturalistic pantheism. And the
so
naturalistic pantheism has properties just like a God, or attributes like a God does. And it has a
mhm.
certain way that it is, which causes it to be more likely to make some kinds of universes than others.
Right. So that and this nature existed before. This is a nature above beyond nature. Like is it
No,
nature?
it's outside of space time, if you want to call it outside of space time, but it's still part of nature. So not all nature began at the Big Bang. Nobody says that. Um,
Oh, okay. Okay.
Nature just refers to all existing things that are essentially non-conscious, more or less.
Okay, got it. Okay. So you don't mean like space-time reality, basically. You just mean like just okay, got it.
Yeah, but by
Oh,
nature,
okay.
nature versus natural versus supernatural, I mean unguided forces that are non-conscious, and supernatural is conscious forces that are non-physical, essentially. So
Right,
natural just
yeah.
means non-conscious things, essentially.
Right, okay. And so then you would attribute like when I said that that you would attribute the whole this undiscovered nature that's beyond physical reality. It's good as well.
No, it just has a property analogous to good. So,
Oh,
goodness in a god, what it does is it makes a life permitting universe more plausible, more reasonable. Because if God is good, being a good god makes him more likely to create a life permitting universe. So, I have a different property, which is the property that interconnects all the forces. And this property does the same thing. It makes one kind of universe more likely than another kind of a universe. So I'm not saying he's good. I'm just an analogous property of saying this is a thing that could make a life permitting universe determines like the necessary result of the nature of nature. Just like God's goodness would make a life permitting universe determined or more likely because God wants intelligent beings because of his goodness property. So this is just an analogous property that makes the laws interconnected to make one combination more likely than another combination.
okay. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I guess so like uh I I I'm trying to I'm I'm trying to think of like some problems I have with it. So like I think they seem a bit um like for example like to assert let me try to think of it in a different way um where I won't be repeating myself. um so like how do you avoid postulating this law or this thing? um how do you avoid the problem that you get with postulating such a lot, like it it seems like it moves the improbability of fine tuning up because it's just more stuff that could be arranged in a different way. That because
Yeah,
do you
that's
see
the
what I'm
point.
saying?
Yeah, it's exactly the point. So when you say God is good, I could just say God's goodness is such that it would create a universe of black holes. So you've added this property to God, and I'm saying, well, that property could be any way, infinitely many ways. It could be the goodness property could just make a God that makes only once black holes. So you're asserting that there's this property here, and that it solves the fine tuning problem. And I mean, that's exactly the point. The one you brought up is like, it doesn't seem to solve anything. All you've done is push it back a step and say, well, who fine tuned God? Because God seems to be just fine tuned too. Like, who fine tuned God to make a
Oh,
universe?
okay. Yeah, yeah. I think the whole fine tune question, like that doesn't make sense to me.
How
Who,
so?
who, who fine tuned God? So, like, God isn't made up of any parts, which is probably the question of why I'm kind of having difficulty with the whole comparing God's properties to the way the universe could have been fine tuned.
Well, parts don't matter here. So if it's not a part from God, then it is a part of God. But a part
So,
doesn't mean like literal parts, like
so
stages. It just means it's of the substance of God. So the quantum nature of the fundamental nature of reality would equally be a non-part. It's just the essence of nature. So either way, it's not a part. So it's not if it's not a part of God, then it's not a part of
uh,
nature. So
yeah,
parts don't
I
make a
don't
difference here.
I don't think that makes sense. I guess I think you would still have that problem.
Which
Um,
problem?
you'd still have the problem of who fine-tuned your more nature, your
How how
undiscovered
is
nature.
how is that more of a problem for my model than it is for your model? Because it seems to be the same on both. Either one of us can argue. Like you can make the assertion that the universe could be infinitely many ways, and I can make the assertion God could be infinitely many ways, and then you make the assertion no, God couldn't be infinitely many ways, and then I could make the assertion no, the universe couldn't be infinitely many ways. They both
Right.
seem to be assertions in all those cases.
Yeah, I don't think they're inertia. I don't think that they're assertions. Like, so to me, it kind of it doesn't it sounds like somewhat incoherent to like talk about nature, but it's not part of space time. Like it just doesn't. I'm still having a hard time with that. Versus like some kind of agent that isn't nature, that isn't part of space time, doesn't have parts, so you can't like calculate it. You can't like divide it up and like calculate probabilities. Like to me, that so you can say it. Yeah, like I feel like we might be going back to the whole you know you're just basically parodying God but removing the personality.
Well, I mean, I
So
would totally disagree. I would say that a mind outside of space-time is completely incoherent. A law outside of space-time makes perfect sense. I mean, it's the consensus in physics, actually. But,
really, what's
yep,
the consensus? Like what are the numbers on that?
emergent space-time. It's I don't remember off the top of my head. You could check the physics, the contemporary attitudes in physics survey, something like that.
Okay, and they'll say that like
Space-time is emergent.
no, more nature, but outside of space time.
Yes, space-time is
That's
emergent. So space-time emerges from more fundamental things that aren't space-time, more
okay.
natural. Like the debate with William Lane Craig, Sean Carroll, everybody asks, what caused the Big Bang in space-time? The vast majority of physicists will say it has nothing to do with a god. So yes, that is the consensus in physics.
Right.
There is more natural stuff
Yeah.
outside of
I,
space-time.
I personally, like I said before, like I don't have a problem going against
Yep.
the consensus because like if there's good reasons to go against it, I'm totally fine with it. Like a lot of times, a lot of our discoveries come about because people challenge the consensus. So I'm okay with that. I know it's important for you, so that's why I was asking.
Yeah.
So
So, but I mean, the point here is when you say it's more reasonable to think of a mind outside of space-time, everybody who understands the field disagrees pretty much. So I don't think that's a
yeah.
reasonable. You can't say, well, because you think so, because you
Hmm.
you interpret it this way, therefore it's more reasonable. It just seems like
Yeah.
your assertion. So
Yeah.
it my assertion that it seems more reasonable that it's a law is supported by significantly more evidence here by the field. So just comparing which is more reasonable isn't a good basis for your argument, especially. But I
Yeah.
really don't think it matters one way or the other. The problem here is that I don't see any reason other than you just asserted that you intuitively feel that there is a mind outside of the universe to conclude that your property makes God one way more than or more likely to be one way rather than other ways, rather than my assertion that the universe has this quantum
Yeah.
interlocking function that makes it more likely to be one way than other ways.
Yeah.
It just seems to be like you intuitively think mines are a better explanation of what could be prior to space time, and that's completely irrelevant to the fine tuning argument.
Yeah.
That's the cosmological argument. So it seems like the fine tuning argument on its own is nothing. It just supports nothing. All you've done is assert that God is has
Yeah.
some kind of determining property and the universe can't have a determining property. And I can just say the same thing.
Right. Right. And I get what you're saying. I guess we haven't really gotten into premise two very much. Well,
What's
maybe we
premise
kind
two?
of. So, uh, well, we actually kind of have, but I haven't really defended. Um, yeah, well, not really. Premise two was the existence of the fine tuning is very improbable under naturalism, and so I had like kind of like a short defense of it or like support for it.
Okay.
And so, but it kind of going back to that
Well,
whole idea is that
well, because what is it? What is your short defense of that?
okay. Um, and so for example, like the existence of fine tuning is very improbable under naturalism. So, like Rob Collins used, like for example, the dart analogy. The initial conditions of the universe and the fundamental parameters of physics are thought of as like, for example, a dartboard that fills a whole galaxy, and the conditions necessary for life to exist as a small 1 foot wide target, or like the fundamental parameters of physics could be. So anyway, let
But
me
yeah,
go
the
back.
size
I
the
lost.
size comparison doesn't matter. He's just saying that the probabilities are unlikely. They're not determined. And
Right, right.
I could just say that yeah, the dartboard has magnets in it and they're really powerful magnets, and so when you throw the dart, they're necessarily going to hit a bullseye every single time. So
Mhm.
if there's some factor in the universe with like this quantum law that I'm hypothesizing, that could be
Right,
like the magnets in the dartboard that cause all the darts to hit exactly where they're supposed to hit every single time. Um, so that analogy doesn't work. Just like you could say that God has some property that makes a life permitting universe more likely, I could just say the universe has some property that makes the life permitting universe more likely. So the analogy is the exact same. It's that you are asserting God has some property that we haven't discovered yet that makes a God more likely to create a life permitting universe. And I can just assert the same thing that there is some property in the universe that we haven't discovered
right.
yet that makes a life permitting universe more likely. And just like you can assert, oh no, that's unlikely. There's no evidence to support this property in the universe that determines all the laws. I could just say the same thing. There's no property or no evidence of any property in a God that makes determines him creating a life permitting universe. All of those both.
Right.
So we both seem to be making the same two assertions. You seem to be
Yeah.
asserting the universe could be any way, therefore it's unlikely it'd be this way. And I'm saying God could be any way, so it's unlikely he would be such a way to create this universe. And then you keep saying no, God has to be one particular way, and I keep saying no, the universe has to be one particular way. So it seems
Mhm.
like we're making the same two assertions about both our hypotheses. I don't see a symmetry breaker between those two to show that your initial argument is correct, that it is more likely under theism. It seems like we have the same two exact arguments.
Right. Yeah. I guess I would say because I like it if I was to finish that analogy, right, the dartboard is like a foot, and uh, the initial conditions of uh, life for life permitting universe would be like the target, the size of a would be like a foot, and the target is about the size of the galaxy. And what are the chances that you throw that dart and you hit that one little foot square for a life permitting universe, right? So
Yeah,
it's
unless there's
very
a really powerful magnet inside the dartboard, and if it's powerful
right,
enough, you would hit it with 100% accuracy. So
right,
it's the same argument.
right. So and I get like I know the direction you're going, but um, I guess like to me the differentiating thing was kind of going back to the whole why I think like more nature or just some force behind it, some mysterious thing, is less likely because like why would we? It does seem more. Um, yeah, I guess like how do I not repeat myself? Because Mm.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm not seeing your argument here, so I haven't seen anything in your argument that would show why a god having this property is more likely than the universe. I don't see a symmetry breaker there. So I don't see
yeah.
in
Or,
anything that you said other than your assertion of creativity was the only thing that I think.
or goodness as well.
Well, those are just again. So you've inserted these properties,
Yeah.
creativity and goodness, and I could just insert different properties. I could say the quantum field, property one and property two.
Uh,
So where is how are these not symmetrical?
yeah. So, I guess I'm gonna track back a little bit, and I remember earlier we were comparing about how I think I think it makes more sense to so for example, like more nature outside of space time, and how you were saying like, well, the consensus among scholars is that it's emergent. Okay, because it does fundamentally come down to you know I think intentionality, and the whole point with the dartboard and that analogy, how the board was the size of the galaxy, was that even right. So you're like, oh, there's a really strong magnet. To me, it seems well, um, if there was something intentionally aiming for that point, then you would get then it would you can infer to something like a mind that intended that example. Or like another example I was going to use was like if you
Just stick with that example. So yeah, if we have a really small dartboard and you have somebody who's aiming at the dartboard to hit it, that's
Mhm.
one way to explain how the dart got in the bullseye. Another is to say there's a really powerful magnet behind the bullseye, and
Right,
it was just randomly floating in the universe and got attracted to the really powerful magnet. So
right.
both explanations can explain how the dart hit the really tiny dart on the dartboard.
Hmm.
One, it was intentional from a mind. Two, it was determined by a really powerful magnet. Both of those can explain the dart on the dartboard.
Okay. Right. Okay. So let me give you another analogy, and I want to try something a little bit different. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. So let's say like the fundamental parameters of physics could be analogous to like metal, plastic, glass, and paint, right? And there's trillions of ways these materials could be combined, right? And it's very unlikely that just by chance you could get a car out of these materials, right? So you got metal, plastic, glass, and paint, right? And so, like, let's say you go, well, you got a car here, and you say, well, it's an engineer or whatever, some car designer, right? And I go, well, it's some undiscovered force that that is just as you know, it's one to one to that engineer. Like, why would I prefer the engineer
Because we have
designer?
examples of engineers, we could just show, like, hey, there's an engineer designing a car. It has a label on it.
Okay, and so because you like, let's say it's the first ever car, and that's the only example you have.
Well, we would compare it to other technologies that are very similar to cars. Like, oh, there's a cart. Oh,
Oh,
there's a horse-drawn carriage. Oh,
okay.
look, there's the wheelie thingy that the Egyptians used, or that they didn't have
Mm,
wheels. So we just compare it to other human technologies and say, ah, it
okay.
looks a lot like a human technology.
What if? Okay, I see what you're saying. What if it was an alien spacecraft, and you have nothing to compare it to? What? And so like,
Well,
but we know
we'd still compare it to human technology. Like, oh, look, it has a joystick. It has
these
a
aren't.
seat in it.
But no, they don't have joysticks. They're not.
Well,
They're like
that's the thing.
metal.
If there's no analogous thing to human technology, we would never be able to conclude its design. It would look like a rock.
Okay,
So everything. The only reason we could conclude its design is if it looks like a human design. If it looks nothing like
got it.
human design, we'd never be able to conclude it design. It would look like a
So
rock to
so
us.
if I understand what you're saying is that aliens aren't human. Aliens don't design the same way we do. Could
Well,
we
no.
ever?
What I'm saying is that we could only conclude design if it looked like human design. So we can only
Right.
identify design if it looks analogous to our kind of design. If it doesn't look
So
analogous, we couldn't we would never be able to see the design even if it was there.
Right. Okay. So even if something was designed by aliens, because they're not human and they don't design things the same way, and it really was designed, we wouldn't be able to tell.
Right. So that's what you just said. So like if we look at an alien spaceship and I said, well, are there any
Uh-huh.
joysticks? And you say, well, there's no joysticks because it can't be like a human design. Okay. Well, are there any seats? They're like, there's no seats. It can't be like a human design. No seats. All right. Are there any buttons? Like, nope. No buttons. There could be no buttons.
Right.
Are there
Right.
any
So
screw holes? No screw holes. Nope. No screw holes. If you get rid of every single thing in human design, we would never, it would look like a rock. It would literally have to look like a rock or an
yeah.
object that we would, or a tesseract or something completely new.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, if you eliminate all of the different properties of human design that we would use as an analogy, we would never be able to conclude it's design because that's how we determine design.
But that sounds like why would I expect for aliens to like if you grant that aliens exist and they do design, like why would they design anything like us? They're not human. They don't they
They
develop
may
their
or
own
may
thing,
not, but that's not the
right?
point here. So the point here is that how we identify design in any given object in the universe is that we compare it to human design. So the only ways that we can identify design is to say design has these properties, has a joystick, has a seat, has screw holes, blah, 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 blah. And if it didn't have any of those properties, we could never say this was designed. It would be the only way that any human can identify design in any other thing is
Right.
to compare it to human design.
So then we would never be able to tell if an alien spacecraft, because you said it would look like a rock. Well, I don't know what it would look like. I don't know
Well,
what
yeah,
it,
so it could,
but
it's just a
we wouldn't be able to tell
right. So like if
what.
we discovered a Tesseract, are you familiar with the Tesseract, the
Yeah, yeah.
four
I,
dimensional
yeah.
four
Oh,
dimensional, or I think yeah, it's a four-dimensional square of some kind. If we discovered that on a beach, we could never say, was this designed or was this produced by nature? Like we would never be able to tell. There's nothing, there's no information in the Tesseract that could tell us if it was designed or just produced by some crazy natural phenomenon. We would have no idea. So unless there was some kind of language written in it, then we could again compare to human design because we have language. If it had a joystick in it, yep, we could compare to human design. It had seats in it, yep, human design. But if it was just a tesseract, we could never know. Or if there was a rock that was containing biological material, like that could have been designed. Was that designed or was that produced by a natural process? Like again, we have no idea. We can't say, well, did the bacteria that has been encased in this rock design this rock? Maybe it's
yeah.
possible, but the only way for us to know is like, does it have a joystick in it? Does it have a seat in it? Does it have screw holes in it? The only way humans can identify design is by comparing to human design. Now, obviously, there's more kinds of design out there that if there were aliens that we haven't discovered yet, but we'd never recognize it as design until we could do it ourselves or had some kind of example of someone building it in front of us. Like if we saw a guy in a workshop building a tesseract, we could be like, ah, that tesseract was designed. We know it's designed because we've seen it be designed in a lab. But if we've never seen that before and we just discover a random tesseract on a beach, it would
Okay.
be unreasonable to conclude one way or the other. Was this designed? Was this a natural process? We have no idea.
So like for example, I'm trying to think of like natives in North America, first time seeing their first like sail ship.
Yep.
I'm
Well, that means that would be analogous to human
sorry, I'm just
design.
chuckling because you're scratching your back.
Yeah. So, well, it's the same thing. We would say that that
um,
looks like a ship. They've created ships. So that would
no,
be
no, but the natives they haven't seen anyone create ships. They only seen these people ride ships,
what
right?
they, what, no, natives have created like log boats for a long time. So,
Right, but not like sail ships.
again, you just need to compare it to human technology. So it'd say, ah, that's just a bigger version of this thingy.
Okay, got okay. So I'm trying to push back. I'm trying to like see how far I can go. So like, what if it was some kind of culture that hasn't developed boats yet? Because I presume that there was a point where people didn't have boats and then they did.
Oh yeah, I mean they
So they,
usually just
so they
identify them
found,
as sea dragons. So
so
sea dragon that we haven't seen
right,
yet. That we actually have
right.
examples of that.
Okay, great. So like, you're telling me like these people couldn't rationally. Well, actually, tell me.
Well,
'Cause I
it's
want
the
to make
exact
sure.
same as the tesseract example. So if you find
They,
a tesseract on the
yeah,
beach and you have no analogous thing to compare it to, you can't conclude it's design. So if they see a boat and they have no analogous thing to compare
right.
it to, they
So
couldn't
if I
conclude design.
if I was that native who did not develop the technology for boats yet, and I saw my first sailboat, would I be rational to say, well, actually, I think it was designed.
No. So if it's the exact same as a Tesseract. If you have literally no
Yeah,
analogous
yeah.
design,
I
you
guess I would
couldn't
disagree.
conclude design.
Yeah, I guess I would disagree. Yeah, that's
Well, again,
interesting.
so go with the Tesseract example. So how
Um,
would you, if you discover a Tesseract on a beach,
yeah,
what reasonable mechanism would you conclude to say this was designed? Because it seems like you're just making stuff up. Like you have an
right.
intuition and that's it.
So like if I could see, for example, like is there intentionality behind it? Is there something that
How would you determine if there was intentionality behind it?
well, I can look at probabilities, I can see like what it
Right.
brings about. Like for example, like you can look at the probabilities of the basically going back to what I'm saying, probabilities of the universe being fine-tuned specifically how it is to allow life. It seems like
No, Tesseract. So go with the Tesseract. How would you
right, right,
like?
right, right. Well, I don't know what a tesseract is used for, so it's tough. But like, if I were to examine it,
Well, if you just discovered it, you couldn't use it for you couldn't use it for anything. You have no idea. You have to have no idea what it's used for. Like if you
right?
know what
But
it's used for,
if,
that's an analogy.
if I just discovered the initial conditions of the universe, and then I figured out that I can, like, this is something we learn. Like, we
Well,
we,
used for is like remember my analogy of like if we see a joystick, used for is like a
right,
joystick.
right. Okay, so I'll take that word away, but I'm trying to kind of you know ask like, okay, well, this tesseract, what can we know about it? So like, the goodness, the um this tesseract, we can like if we can empirically, if we can get some kind of empirical data about it, like if we can like observe it or something,
Sure, we can
right?
hold it.
We we, we can hold it or we can whatever, and we can measure it. We can see certain things, like what is the probability that it's this or that? Like I really don't know, but it we might be able to
Well, the
find some.
probability is zero. So we've never seen a tesseract before. It's produced by absolutely no processes ever seen anywhere by anyone. So the probability, as far as we know, is zero.
The probability, but it's there.
Exactly. But we can't
So
conclude any probabilities at all because
oh right, but once we learn more about it and we test it and do certain things, we can presumably get some information, right?
well, sure, we can get information, but again, the probability is always going to be zero there. We can't ever increase the probability because the only way we could increase the probability is by making an analogy. We could say this part of the tesseract is produced by this mechanism, which we can see happening over here. Either humans do it or nature does it. And then that's the only way we could increase the probability. So the only way to say that the tesseract is more probable to come about or less probable to come about by natural or designed forces is to see a natural or designed force creating a part of it. So we see like, the tesseract has this corner to it, and this corner can be formed by rocks smashing together on the beach. So it's more likely now. Obviously, it's not significantly still very small because that's only one part of the tesseract, but it's become more likely now. Or if we say, but we see nowhere in nature do we see any part of this tesseract being made, then it's very unlikely. And the same thing applies to design. So we see we've never seen anyone design anything like this. So the probability of it being designed is also equally low. So we have zero probability that it's designed and zero probability that it's produced by nature because we don't know of any processes that could do either. And then as we learn, oh, here's a part of it, and this part is produced by this process, which is one or the other, that would increase the probability on one side or the other.
Yeah, I guess I would kind of going back to the whole like native who doesn't have the boat
Well, again, the
technology.
boat analogy completely fails because boats we know
Yeah.
are human made. So you have to pick something like the Tesseract.
No, no,
So,
no. But the example was that this native has never seen a boat, and they haven't developed.
well, no, it's a primed example. You're picking something we know is designed to poison the well in the example. You have to pick something we don't know is designed to give an accurate example, like a Tesseract. So obviously saying, look, a designed object. Is it reasonable for the person to conclude the designed object is designed?
Yeah,
Like the correct
yeah,
answer is no. Like you could never, ever, ever conclude if you have no information that it's designed or not designed. Even if we know it's designed, obviously he would be right if he guessed that, but he
mhm,
would be unreasonable to guess that unless he had
right.
evidence.
So I I think the reason I keep going back to the boat thing is, yeah, I'm not trying to poison the well. At least I don't think I'm doing that unintentionally. But my reasoning is that if this native gets a hold of the boat and he hasn't ever done anything, and okay, of course we know, but he doesn't, right? And then he measures it, and he realizes that you can get into it and it floats, and he can fish, and it's specifically made to like cut through the water better and all that stuff. And so like,
Well, no,
even though he
that's
hasn't
that's
seen
that's
anyone make
exactly
it,
that's poisoning the well, because you said it's specifically made to cut through the water. That's the joystick. You're saying a joystick. So if it has a function that we can use it for deliberately, and again,
yeah,
that you can't use those examples because that's analogous to human design. You can't use an analogy to human design. You have to pick something that has no joystick. If it has a joystick, we're going to say, humans design joysticks. This has a joystick. It's like human design. So again, that's why you have to go with the Tesseract example. To be
mm,
analogous to the universe, you got to go with the Tesseract. So show using your methodology to conclude the universe is
yeah.
designed, show it with the Tesseract. If you can't, then it's unreasonable to conclude the universe is designed.
Okay, so I I don't. I guess in my mind, I'm thinking like, um, we can't assume that it is designed and it isn't if we're just looking at it, right?
Yeah, we can't conclude either.
Okay, we can't conclude either, even if it was.
Right. Like
Okay,
for,
right.
for any for any like unknown, there's always an
So
answer there, but we can't
so
assume you know the answer.
isn't it? It seems like you're limiting what we can conclude about it. If the only way we could ever distinguish whether it's designed is by comparing it to things only humans have designed.
Yeah,
Isn't that like
like
a limitation? Like why would why would we only limit it to what comparing it to what humans design? Is it like
induction. That's how induction works. So like if you have an example of something in the past and you want to know, well, is this thing like that thing? Well, you have to compare it to things in the past that we know about. Like all evidence is based on like induction and things evidence from the past. Like I don't know what would count as evidence that isn't like that.
yeah, I see. So um I'm trying to think here because like I'm going back. I'm thinking about the old example with the alien spaceship, and they don't design like us, and they don't create things like us. And so like
Well,
it's
take
like
that example. See if you could see how would you conclude design from the alien spaceship without using a thing that is analogous to human design. Like how could you do that?
well, I can. So for example, like first thing that comes off the top of my head, like William Lane Craig's fine tuning argument. Like for example, like um, when like the product of this Tesseract could have been like three live options. And maybe you disagree with these, but this is what is coming off the top of my head. It could have been a product. It could have been just chance. It could have had to have existed, or it could have been designed, right? And so to me, for you, it seems like you might say, well, no, that's not a live option. Design is
No,
not a live
that's
option.
fine. I'm fine with those
No,
three.
okay, good. So then, like, well, then, I think you can kind of bring those forth, and then be like, okay, well, let's see which one makes the most sense out of each one of these. And the only way we'd know is if we got our hands on it and we could get some empirical data on it.
Well, okay, we can grant that. Well, what empirical data would include one over the others?
Well, like so if we can determine some kind of probability about it, we can ask, okay,
Okay, make up a probability that shows one over the other.
the probability. I don't know. I'm trying to think if I can even think of a good one. So like the probability of this test track being I don't know, specifically weighing this. I don't know. I can't think of anything random off the top of my head that would make sense. So
Well, because when I hear probability, what I think is that we know of these natural processes,
yeah,
and the likelihood that these natural processes would build this thing is X.
okay, okay. So That's good. Okay, because that's much better than whatever random thing I would have said. And so when we look at these natural processes that can produce this thing, and we think about, okay, well, um, uh, what are the chances given these natural processes that it would happen based off of chance, just randomly? And then we could calculate the numbers and whatever, right? And if it's really, really likely, then we can be like, okay, well, that's kind of a 1 point for chance.
Natural processes, yeah.
Right, natural processes. But if the probabilities that these natural processes bring about this thing are very, very low, then it counts against natural processes.
Wait,
So
what? That doesn't make any sense. So here's the
okay,
problem
why
with
not?
that is that, well, what if there's a natural process we haven't discovered yet, which does make it? Well, because
Right.
then the process, then the probability that's going to be natural process is extremely high. We just don't know it yet.
I'm willing to say, well, that could be God, but what if it has consciousness, right? Could have
Uh, no, so I'm saying like we discover a tesseract on a beach, and deep
or
in the
design.
bottom of the ocean there is a vent that produces tesseracts. We just haven't discovered it yet. So there's a natural process, no mind, that produces tesseracts. We don't know about it yet, and we discover a tesseract on the beach. No natural processes we currently know about can produce the tesseract. Is it reasonable to conclude design because all the natural processes we know about can't do it? Because that was your argument. Your argument said that if none of the natural processes we know about can build the tesseract, that would count against chance and for design. And that doesn't make any sense because there could always be natural processes we just don't know about. Like there could be a tesseract vent, volcanic vent that produces tesseract under the ocean we haven't discovered yet. So just the fact that we don't know of any natural processes that can produce it wouldn't count as evidence of design. You need something else that wouldn't work.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying really hard to avoid the whole like you're just describing God, except
Well, I
you.
mean, a vent, like a volcanic vent, obviously isn't a conscious agent.
Oh, okay, a volcanic vent. Okay, well,
So yeah, if there's a volcanic vent on the bottom of the ocean that produces tesseracts, and we don't know about it yet. So in the analogy, we've discovered a tesseract. No natural forces can produce the tesseract as far as we know.
mhm.
Based on your argument, we should use that to conclude its design. But obviously that's not the case because there could just be a vent at the bottom of the ocean producing these that we haven't discovered yet, which isn't a god. There's no design there. There's just a vent. It's just a natural produced event that we just didn't know about yet. So your
Right.
argument doesn't seem to make sense to conclude that just because none of the natural processes we know about can produce this, conclude design. That doesn't seem to follow.
Yeah, I don't think maybe I misspoke, but I don't think that's the argument I was making.
Okay, so
Yeah,
so what was go with the tesseract? What's the argument? How do we conclude design here?
so we look at the live options,
Chance,
and
necessity, or design?
right, and so um, I think that if we I, I guess we in this case we would have to reject your position that you have to compare it to things that human created.
Well,
I'm
how?
not.
So I'm like asking for example. So given your methodology, whatever methodology you think works, show me how we would conclude design with the tesseract.
So like I'm thinking of like the movie Contact.
Yep.
Okay, and so the reason I don't know if you think that their way of detecting aliens or confirming it was aliens is a good way to do it, but I'm
The
thinking about
numbers,
like
the prime numbers
prime
thing.
numbers. Yeah, they use prime numbers. And so um like to me, like as far as I know, like humans didn't create numbers. So you can't uh even though we can tell that there's prime numbers and they're intentionally doing something to send a message and we somehow are observing it. Um to me, like we can still we can we can recognize that it was intentional. It was not something that you would have just gotten from an exploding supernova.
Well, so are flowers intentional? Pineapples, the shape of a universe, like the golden ratio and prime numbers are pretty common. Like mathematical patterns in universes are really common.
Okay,
So
so yeah, I don't know. So like, would you say that in that movie, the prime numbers that
yeah,
they?
as a dumb example.
Okay, okay. So yeah, maybe not. Okay. Yeah, I guess my point is
I mean, I
that
think it's actually pretty much the same thing has happened like 4 times in cosmology.
really,
They just discovered it was something super
ah,
energy burst that was just discovered
Carl
a few
Sagan.
whiles ago.
Why would Carl Sagan let us down like that, man?
Because he did it 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, he did, huh?
He didn't have the same scientific understanding that we do now. I think he
Yeah.
was the one who actually said that was a really strange example,
Oh,
if
did
it
he? Okay.
remembers.
Okay. Well, I, I guess to me, I think that I don't see any good reason why we would have to compare um, why we would have to compare to human design
Well,
personally.
my argument is that you provided no other way to do it. So I can say that the way
Yeah.
we identify design is we make analogies to human design. So if we discover an object, if it has a joystick, like, okay, we can conclude it's designed because of this method. This method to identify
Right.
design is compared to human design.
Right.
You haven't presented a different method, some other way to do it that works as far as I can tell.
Yeah. If we can see some kind of intentionality, like I said, like a car, those parts coming together, right? Uh, Paint, metal, plastic, glass, right? I think it's far better to conclude that if you just like if you just threw those parts together and you got a car versus like what are the chances that you would actually get a car? There's like trillions of different combinations that you could put the metal, glass, and paint together. I think that
Well, I think that's the same
whenever you
analogy.
complete the car, huh?
I think that's the same analogy. So, for
It is.
example, the Tesseract, we have no known natural processes that can cause all of the parts together to produce the Tesseract. It's just like the car. But again, you can't use a car example because a car has a steering wheel. So a steering wheel is analogous to human design, so that doesn't work.
Right. But
So so just like a car, there's no natural processes we know about that can produce the metal, plastic, and stuff and put it together to a car. Just like there's no natural processes we can see that can produce a Tesseract.
hmm
So again, car is a bad example because we know it's designed and it has a steering wheel, and there's
yeah,
billions of things about the car you could just pick and say, well, this is analogous to human design. So that's not a good example because everything about a car is analogous to human design. But a tesseract is a better example here. So you couldn't say that your method indicates a car is designed because we already know a car is designed. You have to pick something that we don't know about to make an accurate analogy. So the tesseract is exactly like the car in that we know of no natural processes to put all of the pieces together to build a tesseract.
yeah,
So does that mean we should conclude design?
yeah. I think that like basically going down to the whole boat example, all that stuff, or like the alien example. c- We we compare things. We can compare things to things that are created or designed by humans, but I think it seems obvious that um, we could recognize something that's designed even if we have nothing to compare to. I think intentionality is one way, probability is one way, but to me, I don't think that follows. If you have nothing to compare it to, then like for all we know, if we use that reasoning, we could have alien spaceships here. We just could never ever tell if they're designed because they don't design like us. To me, that it just seems counterintuitive.
Okay,
Uh,
so show how would you identify if the tesseract was designed?
yeah, so like if we look at the properties and we see that there is some kind of intentionality behind it, like if I,
That's begging the question. So you can't say, it's designed because we know it has intentionality, which is designed. So you can't say intentionality there. You have to show like what is the property in this that we could use to identify intentionality, which is
right,
literally the same thing as
right.
design.
So okay, going back to the initial conditions to allow for life.
Go with the tesseract. Tesseract. The probability of the tesseract coming about by any natural processes is zero. We have no known natural processes that can produce the tesseract. That's exactly like fine tuning. But fine
Right,
tuning is
right.
actually more likely than the tesseract because we know of the constants. There is a probability of it occurring, given the known constants is just very small. The probability of the tesseract is zero. We know of no possible natural processes that can produce the tesseract. So the fine tuning of the universe is actually more likely than the fine tuning of the tesseract because we know of no natural processes in the case of the tesseract. So again, how would you go? Here's the tesseract. it's extremely unlikely. We have no natural processes that can do this. Does that mean we can conclude design just because there's no natural processes we know of that can do this? Or is it always possible that there's a natural process we haven't discovered yet that could do it?
Yeah, yeah. I guess I just go back to we need to know more about the Tesseract, right? So
Sure. I mean, I grant that, but you could just insert whatever you want, insert whatever knowledge you want here and say, if we know this fact, this is the fact we can use to
right,
conclude design. Tell me what
right,
that fact is.
right. And uh, if it was similar to, I know you don't like me doing this, like a pile of glass, paint, metal, and rubber
Well, it is.
versus
It's exactly similar. It's exactly
yeah,
similar. So
right, right.
the property of there's a bunch of random materials that are in this thing, and we
Hmm.
know of no process that can put them together.
Right.
Those are exactly the same. Now in cars, we
Right.
know humans can do it, so that isn't analogous. So that's a bad analogy,
Yeah,
because
I
it's
think it is analogous because like we could remove all knowledge. We could put this native who's never made a car, and I think he would be able
no, it's
to.
poisoning the well. So in your mind, it's poisoning the well. You can't use a car
Yeah.
because everything about a car is designed. So you have to use a non-designed object like a tesseract. So
Huh.
if the fact that if all of the parts put in together like a tesseract, we found it on a beach, has no analogy to any human design whatsoever, you could
Yeah.
not conclude it's designed. You would just what property in the tesseract could you identify to identify design? Saying that we know of no way to combine all the parts, like we don't know any way to combine all the parts. Is it reasonable to conclude the tesseract is designed? The exact same as the car here. You could just put the car in the exact same place. You get the exact same answer, which is no. You could not conclude it was designed. The problem with
Okay.
the car is that it's primed in your mind because literally everything in the car is designed.
Yeah. I guess we're gonna have to agree to disagree on that. I know I'm probably not doing the best job of answering your question, but
Well, I mean, this isn't about agree to disagree here. You would literally have to show that your methodology could identify or give a property in a tesseract that could identify either designed or not designed. Until you could do that, you don't have anything. You can't
so
compare to a car. You have to tell me what the property is that we could find in the tesseract to know if it was designed or not designed.
okay. So then let me give you another example, and I'm gonna give like
Oh yeah,
why.
time. How much time do you have?
Well, I'm looking at my daughter and she's still sleeping.
Okay,
So, but I do have to feed her soon, so
okay.
I'm gonna have to wake her up. But maybe give me like a second to kind of like tell you why the third premise follows. This is something from like I think it's called the likelihood principle. Okay, so like the third premise is that 1 and 2 follow that the fine tuning data provides strong evidence in favor of design over naturalism or more nature or something like that. Um, and so uh, the third premise follows because of the likelihood principle, and it says that if some evidence is more likely on hypothesis 1 than hypothesis 2, then that evidence confirms hypothesis 1 over hypothesis 2. So here's a quick another.
Well, I
Here's
mean,
another.
yeah, that's obvious. That's just how evidence works. You have more evidence for
Right,
one than
right,
the other.
right.
But again, that the
I wrote it down. So
well, the problem is that again, you haven't provided that. You haven't provided any reason to one or the other. What you would need to do, the whole basis of your argument is built on this idea that a god would is more likely to produce a life-permitting universe than a non-god, a natural thing. And you're saying that you can conclude this because there's a property. God has this property, and we can identify this in the universe. There's something about this that we can see in the property of the designed object that we can identify as design. And
yeah,
you need to tell me what that is. Like you need to be able to give me any neutral object that we don't know if it's designed or not designed, like a tesseract. What is this property that we can look at in the tesseract? How do we identify this property to know it's designed? And until you can give me that property, you don't have anything. You have no model. You just have an assertion. So you need to tell me how in any given random object that we don't know is designed, we could identify this property to tell if it's a real thing or not. Right now, you keep comparing to cars and things
yeah,
and alien design, things we already know are designed. That doesn't help me. Like I can already identify all the things in design based off my method. I'm just comparing it to human design. Does it have a
well,
joystick? Does it have a seat?
yeah.
The problem is
But
that you're saying there's another method, And to demonstrate there is this other method, you have to show me where it is in an object that I can't identify as designed. So a tesseract, my method does not let me conclude this is designed. You have to tell me a property in that not using my method, we could conclude this is designed. In order to substantiate your claim that there is such a property, that there is this property that we can use to identify design that isn't just an analogy to human design, tell me what it is.
Yeah. And so like in this wouldn't be like so like induction. You couldn't use induction to reason to a designer or intelligence,
What?
right? Is
Well,
it,
that's how we do it.
right. And so but induction involves comparing, right?
Yeah.
And so but you won't allow for comparing because we already like am I missing something?
Well, so I'm saying that how we identify design is that we compare to human design. So you're saying that no, we don't need to compare to human design. There's something else. There's something else we can use to identify design. And I'm like, okay, what is that? So
Okay,
so if
well,
you're saying, well, the other thing is to compare to human
yeah,
design, I'm like, that's
yeah.
the thing I said we're doing already. So
I
so
I don't I don't think I don't think you have to. Maybe I'll change my mind on that. Like,
well, that's the thing. So if we don't have to, what is the other option?
right, but I'm actually perfectly happy to compare it to human because
Okay.
I think that's totally fine.
Okay.
Compare it to human design.
Okay.
Uh, because we design things, and if other things are designed, then we can tell if they're
Sure.
designed. I
Sure.
think in fact intentionality is something that humans do, but still,
That's fine too. You would just have to identify which part of the universe is like human design.
right. Well, so I think that the car or the dartboard, like those are examples.
Of what? What is the property that those have, which is like human design in the universe?
What is the property that those have?
Yeah, so it seems like the argument you're making is that that is really, really unlikely. It's really, really unlikely that all of the
Right.
parts of the cars would come together. It's really, really unlikely that the dart would hit the dartboard. It's
Right.
really, really unlikely that a tesseract would come about by any natural process we know about, obviously. But there could be a natural process we don't know about, which makes it really, really, really likely. So
Hmm.
if your argument is that it's really, really unlikely that the dart would hit the dartboard, and it's really, really unlikely that the tesseract would be made by any known process.
Right.
Obviously, I agree with you 100%, but you can't conclude design based off of that because there could be a bunch of things we don't know about yet, which make it really, really likely. So if there's a magnet in the dartboard, then it's really, really likely the dart is going to hit the dartboard if there's a powerful enough magnet in it. We didn't know there was a magnet there. So the
Yeah.
argument that it was you concluded it was designed was based off of our ignorance. We didn't know there's a natural thing determining it there. Just like the tesseract, if you conclude we have know of no natural process that can produce the tesseract, therefore it's designed. Like obviously that it doesn't work because there could just be a tesseract producing volcanic vent in the ocean we just haven't known about yet.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
your entire argument seems to be is an argument from ignorance. We don't know what designed it. We know of no natural process that can design it. Therefore, it must be God.
Right. So I see what you're saying. I guess to to me, like a question that popped up. Do you think that probability would increase the chances? Well, sorry, decrease the chances that it was um, that it was designed.
I'm not sure I follow the question. So probability is like,
So, like, if we use induction, and I am comparing to a car, the what could we use probability to determine that the car was more likely designed than not designed?
well, sure. So I'd say that the way we use probability is we say, here's all the past examples of natural laws. Here's all the past examples of human designed things.
Hmm.
And given the object, which properties does it share the most? If it has more properties in common with the human designed things, like it has a joystick and a chair,
Okay.
then that
Okay.
would increase the probability it's designed. If it has more properties in common with a natural thing, like, oh, it's a crystal or it's produced by black holes or whatever, then we'd say, it's more likely to be natural. But all we're doing there is we're comparing the object and saying which properties does it have more in common with a natural designed property or a human designed property.
Okay.
And,
So,
and my argument is again that when we're identifying the human design properties, all we're doing is comparing to human design. Like, does it have a joystick? Does it have a chair? Does it have screws and nails? And that's it. That's the only way we identify design is by just comparing to human design. I don't think there is another way outside of that.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so yeah, it just goes back to that. So yeah, yeah. I mean, to me, uh, like whether I was talking about a car or a boat or whatever, or even being dealt five royal flushes in a row in poker. Like I'm gonna say, well, he got lucky or someone's cheating, right? And so to you,
Or
it
there's
seems
only royal flushes in the deck.
right. Well, yeah, that's not. I don't. That's not a very. That's I guess an option, but it's not very likely.
Well,
But
there's lots of decks like that. They literally sell them at Target. You could buy. So the
okay,
point here is that
yeah,
it's possible it's designed by a human. They're cheating. It's possible that all the decks are just royal flushes. That it's just a part of nature. Both of those can explain the data. Obviously,
okay,
with cards, we know one is more likely than the other because humans play cards.
yeah.
So
So
just saying there's lots of royal flushes. The property you're describing there is just saying it seems unlikely given the knowledge we have. That seems to be it's just a gambler's fallacy. So
yeah,
if the only property that you're saying that we can use to identify design is it's really unlikely given all the natural processes. There are no natural processes here that can do this. Then we should conclude the Tesseract is designed, but that doesn't work.
I guess to me, I think anybody in that actual situation, like if you were playing like a real game of
Again,
poker,
that's
and you
poisoning the
got
well because we know cards are more. It's more often the case that if people do that, it's done by someone cheating than by a deck full of cards. But again, you have to use an example that isn't poisoning the well for that
yeah,
exact reason.
I guess I'd have to look into see if that's actually poisoning the well or not. If is it okay if I ask you a question that
Sure,
may be a dumb question, but I've actually been thinking about it,
sure.
and it has to do with design. And then I have another question. Man, I hope this doesn't go too long. But then I have okay. So here's the question. And this might be a dumb question, but it kind of occurred to me. Do you believe humans are designed?
No,
Okay. Um, so
not yet. They will be in the future.
yeah, yeah, I get maybe, yeah, CRISPR.
Yep.
But so they're not designed. Okay. Can something that's not designed design something?
Yes.
So this isn't like an objection. This isn't like it's more like I want to know why do you think that is?
Because it's not a composition division fallacy. So, like, can non-walls make walls? Yes. A brick isn't a wall, but if you put a bunch of bricks together, you get a wall. So,
Okay.
a designed object is one that had some kind of uh, a mental faculty making it for some reason or whatever. And
Hmm.
so, if a brain was produced by natural processes, it wasn't designed, but it now has intentionality, so it can design.
Oh,
Just
you
like,
believe in intentionality?
yes,
How do you define intentionality?
the proclivity of a conscious state to do something.
Okay, but it's determined.
Sure.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so you can have intentionality even if it's determined.
Yeah. Like I'm determined to like ice cream, so I have the intentionality of wanting to eat ice cream and make an ice cream maker.
Yeah, I have to look in. Yeah, anyway, that's a different topic. Interesting. So yeah, okay. And then another thing, I know like our first conversation, we were talking about how it has to, in terms of like the cosmological argument, um, uh, it has to be like a free agent, it has to have free will, right?
No,
And
what? Or
conscious,
oh, you mean in your model? In your model?
yeah, 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 yeah. Conscious agent, and it has free will, right? And I wanted to ask you like, um, would you agree that your parity argument when you said, okay, well, it has all these omnis except for consciousness, and it doesn't have free will either, right? In
Yep.
your parity, okay. And so, to me, I feel like your parity might actually have to have some kind of undetermined aspect.
Well, it could be random, like quantum randomness. If you want?
Well, But it's still not determined, right?
Yes, randomness is not determined. Like the consensus in physics is that there is actual true randomness. Randomness is itself a force.
Okay, okay.
But I mean, I don't see that like the quantum necessary thing could be completely determined to make the universe exactly as it is. I don't see any problem with that. Or God could be completely determined to make the universe exactly as it is. So I don't see any necessity for that. But if you wanted, I could add it in.
Yeah, I guess to me, like it seems like reason would kind of lead us to undetermined, because if this thing is like fundamental and there's nothing prior to it to determine it to do anything, then that means it's not determined. And if it's not determined,
No, it can be
then
determined by itself. So it's like its own nature determines itself.
isn't that uh its nature can be determined by itself?
Yeah, like who created God?
Oh, well, that's a category
Right,
error.
but God wasn't created. He exists necessarily. Like, well, did his nature create him? Like, well, no, his nature has always existed. It's always been there, right? It's never not been in existence. So it's
Right.
the same thing. Like saying that is that a contradiction? Did God create himself? Well, no. He never changed. He was always there. So the same thing would apply to the natural property. It's determined
But,
in the
but
exact same way.
how you avoid being causing yourself, right? Like, or sorry, determining yourself, or just being determined would what I would say you have free will. You are not determined.
Did free will make God exist?
No, well, I don't think that's analogous.
Right. So this is the problem: is that if you say God didn't create himself, but he has always existed, that's literally the same thing as saying it's determined, but not by
Something's not
something prior.
determined, but determined.
No, something was determined, but not by something prior. So God exists, but not because of something prior. God has a nature, but not because of something prior. God's nature is determined. Like he can't not be all powerful. He can't not be all knowledgeable. He can't not be perfectly good in your model. So he's determined to have these properties. He's not determined by something prior. It's just a part of his nature.
Right. Yeah. I guess I was thinking it more in the terms of like in a different line of reasoning, like this unknown law, this undiscovered law, is determined, but there's nothing prior to it to determine it. So I guess in my mind, when I'm thinking about it as like dominoes, you got the first domino, and your undiscovered law is the first domino, but the first domino needs to fall over, and if it's
Yep.
not determined, it's not going to fall over because there's nothing behind it pushing it over. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but so what determined God to be all knowledgeable?
Right. That question makes no sense.
Right, you say he wasn't determined. It's just a part of his nature.
Right.
Same thing. So I can
Okay.
so you're uh
So it fell
taking
over
the
on
you're,
itself by itself, right?
well,
The first domino
well,
in your
did God's knowledge fall over by itself?
no, but
Or
I
you
don't.
just say
That's
it's
not the
always
same.
been fallen over. Like you'd say it's always been there, right?
So yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway,
Well, again, it's the same thing. So saying that you're taking the word determined and making it hyper specific to mean one thing when it can mean it's a broader concept. So if saying God's nature is one way and it's determined to be that way because it's always been that way and it couldn't be different, it's determined just by reality. There doesn't need to be a prior domino. It's just a fundamental fact of reality, a brute fact. The same thing can apply to the quantum particle. So it doesn't need to be conscious. It can just be determined by its own nature, just like God's nature is determined by his own nature.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. I have to think more about that. But yeah, I think I need to go. I really enjoyed this, Tom.
Yeah,
I hope
absolutely.
you enjoyed it too. Oh, I wanted to say before I go, you posted like a clip of you playing guitar the other day or whatever.
Yeah.
You're pretty good. That's impressive. And so
Thanks.
I just wanted to say good work. How long have you been playing guitar?
A few years, I guess.
Yeah, awesome. Are you in a band?
No.
All right. All right. Well, never know. You might make a atheist band or something like that. Oh, atheist worship team.
Uh,
Anyway, so yeah, thanks for having me on.
yeah,
I appreciate.
absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Enjoyed the conversation, and I'll let you go.
All right. Yeah, I got to go to bed. I just got back from work, so
Oh yeah.
yeah.
All right.
All right.
See you later.